Hey guys, Sean here. We have reached a dangerous turning point. June's inflation numbers just came out and now the Fed has no choice but to implode the markets. 9.1% inflation for June is no joke. It is serious stuff. We're at a 40-year high and dangerously close to the 1980 high of 15%. Now, there isn't going to be a soft landing. The majority of people are slowly waking up and realizing, hey, we might actually be in a recession, and it's the very worst kind, stagflation. Economic growth is slowing, inflation is not really coming down, and we are just a few steps away from the war in Ukraine escalating. I think we need to understand that there's nowhere else to run in the markets. The bond market is imploding, stocks are falling, and precious metals are getting hammered. It's all thanks to the insane inflation, and we are on the brink of the Fed hiking rates to the moon. Yes, I believe there's a good chance Powell will come out with guns blazing and overcorrect with a 100 basis points hike. There will be a historic interest rate hike, and everyone on Wall Street and Main Street are bracing for impact. Now, time is really running out, and it's just a matter of time before mainstream media starts screaming recession. We are really going to see layoffs across all sectors, especially in banking, technology, and real estate. More and more people are going to be priced out of their homes, and consumer spending will crater to hell. Now, the big problem with inflation is how persistent it will be, and no, it's not just Putin's fault. It does play a part, but a big chunk of the blame really lies on the crazy monetary policies of the Fed and their money printing habits. Now, if we dive deeper in June CPI, it's a horror show that just shows us the true level of inflation, which we all know is higher than the heavily massaged numbers of 9.1%. Now, we see price inflation at 60%, food prices rise by 10.4%, and this is insane. And considering all the supply problems going on in oil and gas around the world, I won't be surprised if we hit triple-digit inflation in gas prices. Now, this is the true inflation rate everyone is feeling, and because it's so super high, the Fed is now left with no choice but to go through with their rate hike threats and likely overcorrect. We're going to see Powell channel the spirit of Paul Volcker and raise rates by a full percentage points or even more down the road. Now, this will cause a big shock to the world economy. Business expansion could grind to a halt, and if you think the S&P 500 can't go any lower, you might be in for quite a surprise. The thing we have to realize about the Fed is that they are reactionary. They don't really plan policy ahead anymore. They have been mainly reacting to economic conditions, and this time they have lost control. Remember that the Fed's dual mandate is to maintain both price stability and low unemployment, and this is really a bipolar mandate. You can't influence one without affecting the other. So right now, we have unstable prices, we have food inflating out of control, and gas prices soaring to the moon. But what we do have is unemployment at an all-time low of 3.6%. This means, at least to the Fed, that the economy is resilient enough to handle higher interest rates and a slowdown of the economy. But what we all don't really realize is that everything does take time to build, and the true effects will only be felt months or years later. Remember when the Fed printed trillions of dollars back in 2020 to bring their balance sheet up from 4 to almost 9 trillion? Inflation was still under 2% from 2020 to 2021. I'm not kidding. It was only until the middle of 2021 when we saw the CPI go from 5 to 7% to 9.1% where we are today. So it does take at least a year for monetary policy to take effect in the economy. Now, the Fed first started hiking rates in March and it's getting progressively bigger. Now, the Fed is out to crush demand, and the economy will only see the full effect sometime early or middle of 2023. That is when we might actually have a bottom in the markets. But for now, we'll likely continue to see every asset class get demolished. The implosion will continue. We're already seeing the S&P 500 crash to nearly 3,700 after an inflation report, and even gold is down year to date by 5 to 6%, which is really disturbing. Even bonds, the so-called safe haven asset during a market crash, are getting clobbered by high inflation, with the bond prices getting smashed to the ground, right? It's around down by 9 to 10%. There's truly nowhere to hide, and it's not just the United States that's being forced to hike rates. We are seeing central banks across the world starting to raise interest rates aggressively in order to prevent runaway inflation. The Bank of Canada has hiked rates by an astounding 100 basis points already. New Zealand has hiked rates by 50 basis points, and the Bank of Korea has done the same. Countries all over the world are beginning to front run the Fed when it comes to rate hikes, because if they don't and the dollar strengthens even further, they'll be caught in a deadly situation where their currency depreciates, imports get more expensive, and local inflation will soar. Now, every government is taking notes from the Sri Lanka situation, and the last thing they want to do is to let food prices get out of control. And that is why we must hang tight for more historic rate hikes down the road. Now the Fed funds rate currently sits at around 1.21% and it's going to go up. But how high can it go? This is the deadly question, because even if power hikes by another 1%, it's only 2.2%, much lower than the current inflation rate. Now, if the Fed is really responsible and they want to fight soaring prices as fast as possible, they will need to do a Paul Volcker and hike rates higher than the current inflation rate. Now, back in the 1980s, inflation soared to over 14%, and Paul Volcker wrestled it down by hiking rates to almost 20%. But things are really different today. We have a $30 trillion debt bubble that was funded by decades of low interest rates. There's a debt to GDP ratio of 125%, and the higher the rate hikes go, the more unstable this house of cards become. In fact, we have banks like Nomura predicting the Fed and the ECB will all cut rates next year. And this begs the question, will these rate cuts happen because inflation's tamped down and victories declared, or is it because the debt bubble might explode and the economy will be in further shambles, right? No one has a crystal ball, but it's likely for the short term, the markets will continue to crash. Now, let's recall the fundamental reasons for markets to rally. We need economic conditions that are favorable for businesses to grow, expand, and take risks. We need an environment where people are confident enough to go out and consume goods and services. People need to feel rich enough to invest in the markets and spend thousands of dollars to buy stupid things like NFTs. And this means that there have to be low interest rates and low inflation rates, right? You need both. And that is the exact situation we had from 2008 onwards. Interest rates were near zero and inflation was only hovering around 2 to 3% on the high end. And that's why we had an epic market rally from the S&P 500 from 800 points to almost 4,800. That is an incredible 10 to 11% year-on-year increase for over a decade. We need those conditions back before we can usher into another bull market once again. We need the casino back. We need the moral hazard of over-optimism and reckless spending. We want to see people gambling in the stock market like the good old GameStop and AMC days, Wall Street bet style. But what we have right now is the exact opposite. We are in a situation where everyone is afraid to spend and consumer sentiment is in the toilet. It is at an all-time low of 58.4, just a few points short of the sentiment back in 08. And this does make sense. When people see their assets crash in price, doesn't matter if it's stocks, precious metals, or real estate, they tend not to spend their cash, and this just feeds into the loop of a slowing economy. And if anyone was actually playing on leverage or borrowed against their equity, they are really getting clobbered right now. Even the smart money aren't borrowing against their equity anymore because they know asset prices are still collapsing and interest rates are likely going to continue to go up. But there's a silver lining for every situation. And this is good news for you and I because there's going to be a time lag before mainstream reports that we are in a recession. We have to understand that this has to be a controlled demolition. Things are going to be fine and just slightly worrying until it is suddenly not. Take this IMF forecast for example, they are still predicting a growth forecast in the US economy of 2.2% when reality is saying otherwise. GDP for Q1 has decreased by 1.6%, while the Fed's own GDP now model predicts Q2 growth will be negative 1.2%. And this shows you the big disconnect between the hard numbers and the pie in the sky forecasts out there. And this gives us some time, not much, but enough time to make preparations, and it doesn't matter if you're fighting for survival or you're looking to get rich from this crash, the basics still apply. You need to conserve cash, earn cash and stack cash. You need to be doing exactly what the Fed is doing. They are pulling cash out of the economy. You gotta cut back on your spending, especially on your discretionaries. Start stockpiling food, go for those buy in bulk discounts because honestly, those are likely the only near guaranteed ROI you can get on your cash today. We are going to see the full effects of deflation come into full force in the months to come, and that means asset prices will likely continue to take a pounding, and once the final domino starts to fall, which I believe is real estate prices, then blood will truly fill the streets. Now it's just the riskiest assets like Bitcoin, tech stocks cratering to earth, but we're already seeing value stocks and gold also getting hammered. And you know what, I won't be surprised if we do see $10,000 Bitcoin within the next year or two. But here's the key thing, once this deflationary spiral comes into full force, either one or two things will happen. It will either be the Great Reset where we all rebuild from ground zero, where we rebuild back from a stronger foundation, but more likely than not, it will be the Great Reinflation once again, where the Fed steps in, lowers rates, and prints money all over again. Now, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, and this is just my best guess of how things will play out. Time is running out, guys, and remember that things can absolutely get worse. The number one wild card we have out there is if Russia and Ukraine war will escalate. Right now, we have oil prices falling thanks to recession worries, but all this could reverse real fast, and it all has to do with the upcoming oil price cap. Now, if you didn't know what all this is about, basically the G7 led by the United States wants to impose a price cap on Russian oil. That means if oil is $100, countries will only value it at maybe $40 or $50 if it comes from Russia. They essentially hope that this will reduce Russian revenues but still keep the oil flowing. Now, they are taking this plan really seriously now, with Janet Yellen personally spearheading this to the rest of the world. And now they are trying to spread this price cap idea to the G20, hoping that India and China will join, and I think they'll be in for quite a surprise. China's definitely not interested in playing ball that easily, and frankly, I don't think this price cap will be passed, but if it does, I think Putin will simply not sell oil to the G7. Now, since the start of the war, Russia has been matching the sanctions move by move. First, Russia priced their gas in rubles, then they cut off gas to Germany for scheduled maintenance, right? What do you think he will do if the West imposes a price cap? Now, this is a wild card that we must watch carefully, because if this happens, then oil prices will spike up once again. We are talking about $150, $180 oil easily, and that will just cause inflation to soar to outer space. And we all know what that means. People will be poorer, the markets will crash, and the Fed will be forced to hike rates even more aggressively. Now, this is the lose-lose scenario for everyone, and I truly hope it doesn't come to pass, but we have to be ready. Start earning more if you can, and start saving every dollar that you can during this period. It isn't time to enjoy and spend like drunken sailors. That time isn't now. Every dollar you stack today will allow you to buy assets on the cheap as they continue to implode. It's time to be prudent when the rest of the world is still blind. When we have a recession, the pain is normally proportional to how much excess is going to be drained out from the economy. A recession is a correction of all the previous mistakes made that artificially created a false boom. Don't you find it weird that from 2008, the US GDP grew on average by 4% a year, while the S&P, which is supposed to be reflective of the US economy, grew non-stop by 11% during the same time period? Where did all this excess money come from? Maybe it's the expanding money supply that tripled in size from 7 to over $21 trillion. Maybe that has something to do with it, right? But now the reverse is true. The Fed is making money more expensive to borrow, and they are selling off their bonds. And when this ramps up to $95 billion a month from September onwards, and you combine it with higher rates, I really don't see any fundamental reason why the markets won't continue going down. Unfortunately, we might truly be screwed this time around. The can has been kicked down the road for too long, and now we have to pay the piper. So if you're averaging to this market, you want to be mentally prepared that prices will likely continue to fall. You want to prepare your emotions to handle seeing all those red numbers on the screen, and understand that if you're buying anything at all, it's for the ultra long haul. So let me know what you think. How bad will this market crash get? Will we see the S&P crater below 3,000? Or are we all wrong and a recovery is actually coming soon? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these turbulent times. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.